My name is Al Schriesheim, and I am the president of the Chicago Council on Science and Technology. As I say, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone here. We are a relatively new organization, only about a little over a year old, and our mission is to heighten really the awareness of science and technology in the Chicago area. The issues that are related to science and technology and the societal implications of science and technology really demand that our population, people, get their information on important issues, stem cells, nuclear power, global warming, you have it, from people who know something about the topic. And if you access the website, www.c2st.org, you see that all of the organizations that have something to do with science and technology in the Chicago area are on the board. There are a number of board members here tonight. Lance Grandy from the Field Museum, Katie runs biological operation, Mary, who I'll introduce later. Who am I missing? All the museums, the two major national laboratories, the major universities, Baxter, Exelon, are all members of the board, and all have this mission of trying to provide the appropriate information on critical issues in science and technology that people should be aware of. The reason I give this background, this speech, is that I'd like, I would encourage you to look at the website. I also encourage you to sign up to become members. $65 buys you a membership for the whole year, and it would be quite an interesting year for you. Okay, now that's my pitch. The evening, it really is a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker. I will point out that I am on the board of Children's Memorial Hospital, and I am also on the board of Children's Memorial Research Institute. Been on those boards for many years. And Mary Hendrix, Dr. Mary Hendrix, who is the president of the Children's Memorial Research Operation and scientific director, has made a vast difference in the operation of that institution. The people that have come as a result of Mary's directorship, the programs that Mary has instituted, the funding that the institution has received from the people who do the funding, have been just remarkable, just remarkable. The board is absolutely delighted with its perspicacity in picking Mary. And in the current climate, a lot of boards can't say that about all the people that they pick. So it is a pleasure, it really is a pleasure. And it also is a pleasure to have Mary as a member of the board of the Chicago Council on Science and Technology. Now, you have in front of you a bio on Mary, on Dr. Hendrix. And I am not going to read that bio to you. I encourage you to do that. Enough said when I said that Mary has done a absolutely phenomenal job in the operation at Children's Memorial Hospital. With that, Mary, you have to live up to my introduction.
So, Alan, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it so much. And I have to tell you, as I look out in the audience, I can't believe that you would come on such a cold evening to listen to a talk so late. But I really appreciate it. And if I might just take a moment to acknowledge the members of my laboratory and our co-workers from Children's Memorial. If I could just ask you to stand and just say thank you very, very much for coming. Thank you, really appreciate it. Thank you. I'd like to talk with you about the next generation of biomedical research and really the implications for the future of healthcare. And I'd like to start out with just 4 main topics. And the most important one I'm going to save for the end. We're going to talk about major biomedical breakthroughs that have changed humanity. We're going to talk about the importance of advocacy in supporting the mission of research, and really that's one of the goals of the Chicago Council on Science and Technologies, to be a great advocate for research. We're going to focus on the economic benefits of investing in research, because there are many. And lastly, we're going to talk about the competing demands on government resources. We're going to focus on who will pay for tomorrow's discoveries, and most importantly, what kind of challenges do researchers face as we try to translate our observations for healthcare benefits. So when we think about major biomedical breakthroughs that have changed humanity, of course, we can think about many. But I've just listed 5 major breakthroughs that I would like us just to think about. If we think about immunization, the development of vaccines and immunotherapies, that truly has changed the way people can survive. It has saved countless lives, and when you think about the evolving technology that has led to the development of vaccines and immunotherapies, we can have a better appreciation for how quickly we can respond to threats and challenges posed by the Ebola virus or the SARS virus. These are different challenges that we can address more quickly with this emerging technology. I have listed the development of antibiotics as a major biomedical breakthrough because we realize how many lives can be saved, how we've reduced mortality and morbidity as a consequence of having antibiotics to treat patients with infections. When we think about transplantations, we really think about extending the quality of life of human beings. When we look at high-resolution imaging, this technology, which truly is evolving every day, allows us to think about a reduced number of what we used to call exploratory surgeries to try to understand what was going on with different organ systems. High-resolution imaging can provide us with a very early staging of a disease at its early possible time. We also think about high-resolution imaging as looking at our arteries, our veins, looking for the buildup of plaque. So really being able to follow the progression of disease at a very early point in its development. And last, but certainly not least, I would like to talk with you about the Human Genome Project and what it is now bringing to us as we enter 21st century medicine. The Human Genome Project was developed and led by the National Human Genome Research Institute at the National Institute of Health, NIH, but it also was co-led by the Department of Energy. And so when we think about the Genome Institute, we always think about, well, that's where the human genome was sequenced. But I'm going to give you a little more background information about how many groups contributed to this marvelous discovery. Here we see a picture in this slide of the double helix. And of course, we see pictures of chromosomes containing genes that encode for certain proteins. And I will tell you that this slide shows us all the mysteries of human disease that we need to uncover and understand. The Human Genome Project was truly an international government project that ended ahead of schedule, which is hard to believe. But it involved not only the United States, but England, France, Germany, Japan, Australia. So it was really quite a highly organized effort. And this is a statement that you really don't see in connection with a government project, and that is it was under budget. So the entire project was approximately $3 billion, and the sequencing of the human genome really came well under that budget. From its start, the Human Genome Project earmarked funds that would focus on the ethical, legal, and social implications of the discoveries to be made by the sequencing of the human genome. And this particular initiative is known as ELSI. Also, the Human Genome Project, as we know, produced the sequencing of the human genome. It spawned a new field of research that we refer to as genomics. It spurred new technologies that we are experiencing every day. And it now provides us with an opportunity to apply new knowledge and technologies and approaches to understand who we are and how to improve our health and well-being. Now, in April 2003, there was a celebration in Washington, D.C. And this celebration focused on the 50th anniversary of Watson and Crick's description of DNA double helix. It was a celebration for the completion of the Human Genome Sequencing Project, which was an international consortium project. But really, it was the unveiling of a bold new vision for the future of genomics research. But I want to caution all of us, just because the human genome was sequenced, this is not the post-genome era. We really think of ourselves as just beginning the genome era, and I'll tell you why I say that. In this beautiful picture that was developed by Francis Collins is really the essence of why we're just beginning the genome era. Francis Collins, who was the head of the Human Genome Institute and responsible for leading the Human Genome Project, pictures this entire genomic process in the era that we're now entering into as an architectural concept. And he introduced to Science Magazine and to Nature Magazine in 2003 that the Human Genome Project simply forms the basement of this architectural concept for where genomics will be headed. And as we see currently, we're beginning to apply the information from the Genome Project to biology. We are asking biological questions using a number of different models and trying to understand the function and processing of genes and their importance with respect to biological events such as development, such as quiescence and aging, such as the development of different diseases. We also appreciate that we're going to be able to use this genomic information, genomic revolution, to improve health, to be able to understand which genes might be considered susceptibility genes for our ability to be predisposed to certain diseases. And also, very interesting concept, we're going to learn a great deal about genomics and their relationship to society. So the real question that we ask at this point, are the genomes of different individuals all the same? Are they different? Do different societies have different genotypic phenotypes and profiles than others? And what can we learn? Are certain members of society predisposed to certain diseases and others just completely immune to them? This is the kind of information that we're going to try to extract and generate from the sequencing of the human genome. And I think it's a very exciting time to be involved in science and medicine. And of course, we have these very important outshoots and offshoots, as we see here, of this project, and that is the education. We have to add this genome education so that all of our students and everyone who comes behind us in the educational process will learn about the sequencing of the human genome and the implications. We have the ELSI initiative here, the ethical, legal, and society implications. We have training. We have to think of a new way to train scientists, to train undergraduates, to train doctors, healthcare professionals. Computational biology will play a critical role in how we manage and integrate this information for the use of health benefits. And of course, we have technology and development that will play a very important role in maintaining our infrastructure and allowing us to go to the next level. And of course, we're always looking for resources to be able to fulfill our goals. Now, when we think about diseases in general, we appreciate the fact that virtually all diseases, with the exception of trauma, have a genetic component. And so if we look here at the genetic component of cystic fibrosis, as well as adult onset diabetes, as well as AIDS, it gives us really an opportunity to think about how to look at individuals and try to understand if they will be susceptible to developing these certain diseases, and how to treat them at their earliest possible stages. So I'd like to give you just a very busy slide that shows you how far we've come by the second quarter of 2008. When we look at all these different chromosomes, where scientists have been able to map and identify all of these different genes on these different chromosomes, and these genes appear to be associated with and responsible for specific diseases. So of course we see some of these such as Crohn's disease, we see others such as breast cancer, other digestive diseases, diabetes, and so we're just beginning to identify these specific genes, and now we're going to begin to translate these findings to how we can help people with these diseases. Now, the Human Genome Project has also given us a new field and an application known as pharmacogenomics. And that is being able to use your genomic information to predict how you will respond to the treatment, certain chemotherapies, certain other kinds of treatments, possibly for arthritis, with respect to a medicine you may be given, a clinical trial you may wish to engage in. And how this would work is shown here. We see that all of these patients, of course, would be genetically screened. And some of these patients, of course, would go on to receive a certain treatment, while others would be removed because they do not express certain genes that would allow them to be responsive to a particular treatment, and still others will be removed because they have genes that appear to be associated with a toxic response that they could have to a certain treatment. So with this in mind, the pharmaceutical industries, together with researchers, together with new clinical trials, are really focused on how to select individuals who would receive the most beneficial and efficacious treatment from a certain drug, all based on genomic information. Also, the Genome Era and all of the information associated with it has given rise to many, many, many websites. And these are public websites, publicly accessible, public databases, where individuals are focused on taking genetics information, placing it at websites so that you can query it with respect to certain diseases. And in certain situations here, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, there are many other kinds of genetic predispositions and genetic associations that have been made. Most importantly, as you tap onto these websites, you may wish to be a participant. So this would allow you to participate. It would allow you to learn the current information with respect to specific disorders. And I might add that one of the largest public databases that's currently being generated is the PubMed Central. And this is a database that requires researchers, scientists, investigators to place their publication, their peer-reviewed publication, at this website so that it be available to the public to understand and to read the latest research. Now, specifically, if researchers receive federal funds, we are required within a year to place our publication at that website. And of course, I think you have a moral responsibility if you are not funded by the government to also place your publication at that website. It really allows us to communicate with the public. I can't tell you how many emails researchers receive with respect to certain diseases that we might be focusing on, studying, generating new information. We receive emails from patients asking us for more information. How can we help them? How can we direct them to the best possible clinical care? And that connection can be made at PubMed Central. Now, the social policy issues are really quite challenging. And I just have listed a few of them on this slide. But we predict that within the next 10 years, within the next decade, all newborns will have a genetic passport. So at the time of birth, there will be genomic screening, and there will be a genetic passport that stays with them in their electronic medical record for their entire lifetime. And when we think about the implications of this, of course, we have to think about how will our genetic information be applied to or be recognized by health insurance. And for example, our greatest worry is that a health provider and an insurance provider may look at our genes and may think that we have many genes that are predisposed to many different disorders and health problems. Therefore, we will either be denied insurance potentially, or we're going to have to pay a higher rate, because more than likely we'll be going to the hospital and to the doctor's office more often. These are just some examples of what different groups in the country are currently grappling with, trying to address from a very moral and social perspective. We wonder how our genetic information might be applied to the workplace. I mean, will a potential future employer ask to see our genetic information? And should we give it to them? Do we have rights to keep it confidential and private? Again, these are issues that we're just beginning to address. Genetic privacy and confidentiality is a major issue, especially for individuals who have current maladies and disorders. They worry constantly that their information may not be kept confidential. There's going to be a very interesting genetic information application potentially to the forensic use of information. And what I mean by that is that criminals whose genetic information is being genotyped, there could be genes associated with a criminal phenotype. So what do we do with that kind of information? And how do we protect it? How do we use it most efficiently? And of course, intellectual property and patenting. I know we have several attorneys in the audience here who may have some wonderful ideas about should we or should we not patent genes? What does that do to inhibit or slow down the translation of research that might focus on the use of genes to predict certain diseases? So we have many social issues to consider. Not the least of which is the marriage gene. This is a joke. This is a slide, but it has appeared in a newspaper. I just want you to know. And you know, when I first saw this this slide, the first thing I thought is he went to Jared's, because you know we hear that so much on the TV. Although we can make fun of this, I will tell you that there are websites that look just like that called Dating DNA. And the purpose of this website is to try to match, based on your genetic profile and the potential mate's genetic profile, what would be the best fit. It's out there. These are uncontrolled. They're not monitored. You have to take your chances with them if you're so inclined. I will also say that there are other websites that offer the service of screening your genome and then giving you the analysis with respect to genes that might predispose you to certain diseases. And again, this is a website that is not monitored. There's no quality control or quality assurance, and I think you have to be very careful if you engage in this kind of a service, what it really means. So where is genomics headed? I can say it's getting very, very personal. And I'm going to tell you the positive perspective of that. That is, genes are being discovered that are responsible for certain diseases. And this information will lead to personalized medical treatments. And in this regard, where we're focusing right now is we're taking our efforts and trying to work in very large consortium groups to try to extract data, clinical data, from patients that exist in electronic medical records. We're trying to attach it to genomic screening and to clinical outcomes. And one of these such programs is called eMERGE, Electronic Medical Records and Genomics Network. It's a multi-member consortium. It's formed to develop, disseminate, and apply approaches to research that combine DNA biorepositories with electronic medical record systems for large-scale, high-throughput genetic research. And as it turns out, one of the members of eMERGE happens to be Northwestern University. Another member is the Mayo Clinic, very large group, both the Rochester group and the Jacksonville group. So this will give you an idea of the thousands and thousands of patients whose records will be accessed for this system. Now, another very, very large effort, also with a Chicago-based component, I'm delighted to say, is the National Children's Study. So this study consists of epidemiologic and genetic studies focused on over 100,000 children across the United States at 105 sites, including 2,000 families from Cook County. And the children are being followed from before birth to age 21. $32 million was awarded to Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine and Children's Memorial for 7 years. So for 7 years, these studies will take place that will essentially form the foundation for the pediatric precursors underlying adult diseases. And I think this is a very, very exciting outcome that we truly anticipate. And it gives us great hope that when we look at children and we might be able to look at certain genes in children that might later on give rise to arthritis, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and to be able to recognize that at age 1, 2, 3, very, very young ages, and be able to treat those at an early age really preempts the diseases at the earliest possible stage. The New Gene Project, New standing for Northwestern University, is also another very large consortium where it represents a biobank of genomic DNA linked with an electronic medical record. Data is generated through routine clinical care. There's voluntary participation of patients from outpatient clinics and from hospital. All they have to do is give a small blood sample, and it's stored in this biorepository. There'll be longitudinal medical information from the participants. It'll be captured from the electronic medical record from all affiliated medical institutions as well, so Children's Memorial also feeds in to the New Gene Project. It'll serve as a centralized resource for genetic information and for research, and it's funded by the National Human Genome Research Institute, and so this will really serve as a great resource for many different universities and private sector groups. Now, with all of this information that will emerge from these very large consortia and the group efforts, such as the International Genome Project, it's important that we begin to develop tools and think about how to harness and manage all of this information that we will call data information knowledge. As you can imagine, our small computers that we have on our desks will be entirely overwhelmed unless we have the appropriate tools to query these very large databases. So when we think about taking a discovery and being able to bring it to clinical application, specifically to diagnostics and therapeutics, we have to think about the next generation of research tool that will allow us to do that. And I would like to tell you in this one slide about one of these tools that's been developed. It's called Xenabase XP. It was developed by a group in Michigan at the Van Andel Institute. Children's Memorial recently licensed this particular research pool for about $4 million, and this is what it allows us to do. It allows us to integrate information and data that we can take from an electronic medical record of a patient in the hospital, where we can combine the histopathology of the diseased tissue of that patient, where we can look at the molecular analysis of all the molecular pathways and genes that are involved in that diseased tissue and disease process, where we can follow with imaging the high-resolution imaging of the diseased tissue in the patient over time, and where we can then query all pharmaceutical databases for all known drugs that can target specific genes and proteins in this molecular pathway. So we can give this information in a highly integrated manner, make recommendations to clinicians for the best possible treatments for their patients. It's a very exciting time to be involved in research, and I would say at no other time in history have we been this close to translating our basic science observations for clinical application and for healthcare. So how important is advocacy in supporting the mission of research? And I would say that all of you who kindly attended the session this evening obviously are advocates for biomedical research. You have an interest in research. And I'd like to give this quote from the Honorable John Porter, former congressman from the state of Illinois. How important is advocacy? He says that since most members of Congress are not scientists, citizen scientists must individually inform, educate, inspire, and direct their representatives regarding public policy decisions affecting science. And I think that's a profound statement. Now, when Americans are polled, and I'm going to give you just a little bit of information of what Americans think about spending money on research. In a poll that was prepared for Research America, a national poll, Americans say that not enough money is spent on research. And in 2007, the United States spent about 5.5 cents of each healthcare dollar on research to prevent, cure, and treat disease and disability. And Americans think that's just not enough. Also, when Americans were asked which groups should be most influential in telling the government how to spend money for medical research, the poll revealed that patients and scientists should be leaders in this endeavor, telling the government, telling Congress how money should be spent. What are the most important healthcare issues? I think we would not disagree that the most important healthcare issue right now is the high rising healthcare costs of drugs and just healthcare provision in general. And most Americans felt that this was the single most important issue that they face. Now, this is very exciting for us because research is considered a major solution to rising healthcare costs, where Americans felt, to the greatest degree, that if we could spend more money in research, that we would see a decline in healthcare costs. Also, Americans are willing to be genetically tested for personalized medicine. They understand it, they understand the advantages of it, and they're willing to be tested. And I'd say, most importantly, these same Americans are willing to share their healthcare information to improve the overall health and well-being of everyone. So this is a very, very important question that was asked, with 87% of the responders saying we're willing to share. So from a scientific perspective, as a scientist in the field, I have to say that we have a great responsibility. It is a privilege for us to be engaged in scientific research. The relationship between science and society is growing ever more intimate. The spirit of inquiry behind science is not self-sustaining, so it's increasingly dependent on societal support, on all of our support. So it's our moral responsibility to be good stewards of this support and to communicate our findings to the public. And that's why I think public databases such as PubMed Central, although difficult to enter all of our papers and information, it's important that we do it as good stewards of what we do in research. Better healthcare through research. What are the economic benefits of investing in research? So Lasker Funding First has said investment in research saves lives and saves money. And I think we would not disagree with that. Also, if you look at the portfolio of the U.S. investment in health research, we see that the pharmaceutical industry has the blue part of the pie here, and that the federal government balances out with just a little bit more with their input into the entire portfolio. But we also appreciate that biotechnology spends money for research, obviously, invests in it. We see state and local governments investing, as well as philanthropic groups, as well as universities. And I would say that our economic challenges that we're facing right now affect all of us and affect this investment in research. And when we think about the portfolio from a different perspective, what we know is that the National Institute of Health, NIH, spends about $28 billion, and they spend the majority of the money in basic research, the discovery part of the big discovery engine. And then they spend the next amount of money in translational research, and then at the top of the peak here, clinical research. But if you look at the private sector investment, it's really the reciprocal, where most of their money and investment is in the clinical research side of the portfolio because they want to take it to market. They do have to please the people who provide them with funding, their shareholders, and so they really focus from a different perspective. However, they have learned very nicely how to benefit from the basic discoveries in university systems and be able to translate that to the clinic. Now, what's happened with respect to government funding, particularly with respect to the National Institute of Health budget, is shown here. John Porter from Illinois led the crusade to double the NIH budget, and he did so when he was in the House, in the Congress, between 1998 and 2003. And we see this remarkable jump from $13.7 billion to $27.1 billion. Then after 2003, the research budget at the NIH has really flatlined. And if you consider with respect to inflation, we're really operating at below inflation rates. And so what we see is that as the budget was doubling, we saw this remarkable increase in grant applications shown on this white line. And as the grant applications were going up and the budget was flatlining and coming down, we also see that the success rate of scientists also is diminishing. And scientists are becoming very, very discouraged by this fact. What else happened to this entire process is really we had three fundamental drivers. When the doubling was occurring, universities, academic centers invested greatly in building more buildings because there was so much money from the NIH. They were hiring more faculty. The faculty were getting more grants. It was great. There was exponential growth. And then we experienced the flattening of the budget. We had more applicants, more applications, and now we're dealing with these below inflationary rates at the NIH. So really, I like to put it in terms of the O'Hare scenario, where the budget was landing in 2003 and applications were just taking off. And I would say that that was a near miss, possibly. With the new runway, what we see is there is a supply and demand imbalance right now that we are experiencing. We're very worried about junior scientists trying to coax them into the scientific pipeline. Morale is very, very low. And so we're at the point now where maybe with the new administration, we're going to be able to see maybe more increases in the NIH budget and other federal budgets as well. But I am happy to report that there are unequivocal, and I mean this, health dividends that we have experienced with respect to investing in research. And this is something we should all be very excited about because worldwide, the United States is considered to be at the forefront of spending on medical research. And the benefits linked to research and development include life expectancy gains, both in women and in men, which lead to net annual gains in the U.S. economy worth $2.4 trillion. We have newly developed medications, for example, for schizophrenia, that have led to reduced hospitalization by about 30%. This has resulted in $1.7 billion estimated annual savings in hospitalization. And then, of course, we see new antidepressant drugs also leading to the savings, as well as operations for peptic ulcers have decreased by 80% based on new pharmaceuticals. This results in an annual cost savings of about $600 million. And so all of these improvements that we see have led to overall improvements in mortality and morbidity, and they can definitely be attributed to biomedical advances. Local, if we think about this, America is living longer and healthier. When we think about just general diseases such as heart disease and stroke, vision impairment, osteoporosis, there have been marked improvements in all of these areas. For the first time this year, I've learned from the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute, the incidence of cancer is on the decline. I mean, there are many things we can look forward to with respect to a happier and healthier America. Also, and this is the last question I'd like to address, with these competing demands on the government resources, and we know what these competing demands are, we worry about who will pay for tomorrow's discoveries. And we have to think about it this way. We're going to need very creative academic, philanthropic, corporate government partnerships. We have to figure out how to work together with combined resources. And we feel that these should be led by advocacy, scientists, as well as advocacy groups to advance cures and treatments. But I'd also like to spend just a few slides telling you about the other challenges that we face trying to translate our discoveries from the laboratory to the clinic. So the challenges facing the translation of science to healthcare. The struggling economy has not excluded academic institutions. We see an erosion of our endowments. We see the curtailing of new building. We see the freezing of faculty and staff hiring. We see this, we feel it, we experience it. Also, we're now beginning to look at these cliches that we see in journals, and I'll just share a few of them with you. Science for sale, campus capitalism, commercialization of higher education. These are becoming a reality, really. Scientists find themselves battling with their employers for the right to pursue their discoveries in the laboratory and publish, and not forfeit their work to a business venture. So if we think about a quote that I would like to share with you from Philip Moriarty from the University of Nottingham, and I think when you look at this, it really is quite profound. The increasing emphasis on commercialization and market forces in modern universities is fundamentally at odds with core academic principles. Publicly funded academics have an obligation to carry out science for the public good, and this responsibility is not compatible with entrepreneurial ethos increasingly expected of university research. So if we just think about this, if universities and academic centers are trying to stay afloat economically, and they feel that they can gain support, gain extra finances for their infrastructure by taking discoveries of scientists and selling them to venture capital, then we have to think about what we're doing. And we have to think about the good of the public. This I thought was very cute, an article that was published in the journal Clinical Investigation, and it was called When Science Rides the MTA. MTA is not the mass transit authority here. MTA refers to material transfer agreements and technology licensing offices on academic campuses. And this article illuminates that scientists are not supposed to communicate directly with their colleagues in exchanging useful reagents for experiments, because these could be lucrative for universities. So we have a lot of bureaucracy that has now been built up around just the transfer of reagents. And I'll just give you an example. Scientists are pretty excited about their work. They go to a meeting, they would like to be able to talk about it. They would like to be able to exchange an antibody, some other kind of reagent with a colleague. They'd like to communicate by internet and do this kind of interaction. And they are now inhibited to do that if intellectual property is at stake. And the reason is the university must protect any kind of asset that is being exchanged in case it leads to some kind of lucrative deal with a biotechnology or pharmaceutical company. And so the Bayh-Dole Act that was passed by Congress in 1980 permits universities to obtain patents on the results of federally funded research. And I have to say, it has benefited society tremendously by allowing the for-profit companies to exploit, and I should have bolded the word exploit, the great basic discoveries in universities. But we may be entering a transition in universities now from publish or perish to patent and prosper. So it's just something to think about. And I'd like to just leave us with this idea. Has the pendulum swung too far? And in this scenario that I'd like to share with you is if your institutional officer accepted the terms of an exclusive license agreement with a company for a researcher's intellectual property, what that means is that all of your past, current, and future for the 20-year life of a patent discoveries belongs to that particular company with an exclusive right. All reagents that are created by the researcher during the licensing period belong to the company. The researcher can't share them with a colleague. They can't sell them to try to get some money to keep their lab going. It belongs to the company. The researcher must seek permission to publish and have their manuscripts approved for release by the company. The ability to freely discuss data, findings with colleagues is censored, and divorce is almost impossible from the researcher's side of the deal. So it's just something for us to consider. Has the pendulum swung too far? In some cases, it may have. So as we think about the future, going forward, medicine and transforming medicine from curative to preemptive, that will be the theme for the 21st century and beyond. How we take information in a gene chip, how we take this information, how we adapt it to be predictive of certain diseases, how we personalize the treatments for patients based on their genomic information, and how we preempt diseases from becoming morbid, and how we catch them at their earliest possible stage. This is going to require partnerships with all entities that we've discussed this evening, the participation of patients, of advocates, of Congress to support this work. It's really going to require a remarkable partnership. And lastly, I would just like to say, although we face many, many challenges, and although we will figure out how to work together for the benefit of all, I would like to leave us with the idea that the greatest risk in science is to stop taking risks. So I thank all of you for your attention this evening and for coming out in the cold. I'd be happy to address any questions you might have. Thank you.
So do you have any ideas on what the solution is to the clash between corporate and academic interests in the university system?
I would say from our perspective, before I hand it over to Alice, one thing we have learned, and I would say we learned the hard way, you remember those lessons more, is that you don't want to give an exclusive license to biotech or pharmaceutical industry, because an exclusive license allows a company to either bury your finding or advance it in a way that you may have no knowledge or involvement in going forward. If you can work with industry in a non-exclusive license way and work with several different partners, that seems to be the best way to go, because I think the competition is really quite healthy. Right. Yeah, the relationships that one is able to forge with biotech to take their observations to the next level, that is the critical relationship. It truly is. Yeah.
Are there any alternate ways to define what the deliverable products are between the research institution and the corporate entity that would be maybe different from the way they're done now, so it wouldn't require an exclusive agreement that encompasses everything?
Yes, so I'll answer that. I mean, just based on our personal experience, it's, as Alice said, you have to be creative. And the parties involved have to be willing to accept the fact that scientists would like to have a part of how their product is commercialized, how it goes to the next level. And so I would say that researchers will be as fortunate as the attorney team that is selected to negotiate for them, because they're all different levels. And so I do think that having the opportunity to get a team that's very experienced, like Alice's team and some others, that's the key. I really think so. Yeah.
You mentioned that I think it was 5.5 cents of every dollar is spent on research. How do we compare to other westernized countries in terms of their expenditures on research?
Right. That was an excellent question. Did everyone hear that in the back? If we spend about 5.5 cents per healthcare dollar for biomedical research, how does that compare with other countries? So as it turns out, we spend, at least as of last year, about 1/3 as much money as Japan right now. That's very important. China, remarkably, is investing at an exponential rate in research that's going to almost eclipse Japan. We spend far more than England, Germany, and France right now. I was invited to give parts of this presentation to the Australian government a few years ago to show them how much money the United States spent for research so that they would begin to think about also investing more in biomedical research. We're still at the top. How much longer we're able to maintain that position is truly unknown, with these other countries focused on trying to spend more, and really more for commercialization as well. Yeah, but great question, yes. Yeah.
Does corporate funding of research studies create a bias in medical journals when it comes to drugs or medical procedures? Because there's been complaints about that.
Does corporate
funding of pharmaceuticals and medical procedures create a bias in the studies and journals?
So that's a very interesting question. Does the corporate funding from pharmaceuticals create a bias? I would say right now, I say last year and now probably this year and going forward, the conflict of interest issue has reached the level of Congress to a level that we've never seen before. And I'll just give you an example. If biotech or pharmaceutical industry is giving a physician funding to conduct a clinical trial, and there's a publication that emanates from that work, the conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest is so great right now that it's almost difficult for researchers to become involved or want to become involved. I would say the perception by some members of Congress, I'm thinking of Chuck Grassley from Iowa at the top of that list right now, there is a great concern that the perception is that there is a conflict, that the pharmaceutical industry is somehow biasing data that is published, because at this point we are unable to look at all of the data records that the pharmaceutical industry has versus the records of a particular researcher. However, 2 months ago, the NIH created a new website, and it was called nih.gov for clinical trials. So everyone is now morally responsible for entering all adverse events that occur on clinical trials, all of their clinical trial data, no matter what the funding is. Everyone has to enter it onto that website. So I think, to answer your question, we're going to see a change in the perception of whether there is a bias or not from pharmaceutical industry. So, I mean, that is an incredible enigma. You know, how we're able to translate all of this investment in biomedical research, which you could argue has had benefits, you know, some of the benefits I shared with you. Life expectancy certainly has been prolonged, but when you think about all of the information, of course, that we've heard recently about newborns, you know, a certain population of newborns not being taken care of, malnutrition in the United States. I mean, I would submit that at some point, every sector of the human race in the United States is not benefiting from this investment in biomedical research. And then you have to say it's up to the advocacy groups to try to represent the underserved, because it truly is the underserved who are not benefiting in some of these areas. And I think that helps to explain the discrepancy. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question on that then. In terms of the spending right now, most of it goes into pharmaceutical sales. How can we get more into like non-pharmaceutical interventions with disease? Seems like a lot of the other countries, will say like India, for example, China, Japan, are really focused on, let's say, nutrigenomics, kind of things that really tackle health and disease through nutritional interventions. And which, number one, is it's a much more, I guess, efficient way in terms of cost. Maybe not setting up studies and things like that, but in terms of research and development and patent issues, you can't patent garlic for cholesterol or blood thinning or things along that line. You can't patent fish oil for hyperlipidemia and things like that. So
I would say that the public databases, I mean, your question really goes to the importance of these public databases. What you mentioned, what you can't patent, people can still use. You know, the garlic, the fish oils. I'm smiling because Dr. Richard Sefter usually downloads a lot of these great papers, brings them to our lab meeting, and goes, look what we could be eating. That would improve our health. So you bring up a great point. But also when you mentioned India and China, different countries, I think it's no secret that many clinical trials conducted by pharmaceutical industries are going offshore. And they're going offshore to these different countries specifically because the IRB, the internal regulatory boards, have less of a requirement, sometimes if any, for some of these clinical trials. And so these pharmaceutical industry thinks they can get an answer more quickly doing these trials offshore. And I would argue, I hope that changes. I hope that in the United States we have more participants who want to be part of them, and that we have IRB committees that truly try to figure out how to facilitate the performance of these clinical trials within the United States. But I think with these public databases, the public is becoming so sophisticated in their ability to extract this information, to look for this information, and then to benefit from it. I would say that many doctors are receiving visits from patients who go in and have more up-to-date information about their disease, and I think everybody's sort of shaking their heads, than some of these doctors. So I think the public will be driving the medical healthcare industry in this area. But I thank you for that question.
One of the things you alluded to is sort of the personalization of medicine. And I was reading an article in, I think, New England Journal of Medicine this week, where there was success in potentially treating one of the dystrophies, maybe Duchenne dystrophy or something, with antisense oligos. And one thing that some of the editorials around that article brought up is that while it's a very successful treatment, it's extremely specialized because in most cases the mutations are very specific. Yes. And while you could use it in a variety of different people, it doesn't fit into the paradigms that we have now, both for drug approval through the FDA, because you can't test on a large cohort, and then also for marketing. Companies don't want to invest in that because while maybe profitable globally, it's going to be really expensive. So where does the role of government come in for that type of personalization of medicine and actually delivering it?
Right. So you really brought up a great question, and that is the gene therapy trials. Oh my gosh. The first gene therapy trials that were done more than a decade ago, the adverse effects from those trials, we're still experiencing them today. So in the laboratory, when you find these gene mutations and in a mouse model, or other kind of a model, you can correct the disease and you're so excited, but you realize that it's going to be too difficult in today's climate mentality to try to take that to market. I think we're going to see a change of leadership and the way business is conducted at the FDA. I really do. I sense with this new administration, we're going to see all new appointees who really work as a team. National Institute of Health, the CDC, the FDA, they're really going to work together to bring these treatments forward, because we're going to need a patient cohort. We're going to have to try to get around these issues. And again, with this new website for reporting adverse effects, it really makes the whole process more transparent, so that one drug company who might be pursuing this gene therapy might see the adverse effects reported by another on this website, and they won't go down that road. This is going to save us a lot of duplicative funding in many, many different areas. So I have great hopes for it. I hope everybody agrees to enter their information on it. That's good. Thank you.
In the physical sciences, there is a segment of research that we call basic research, curiosity-driven research, research which does not have any apparent application or outcome. And there's still a source of funding for that. Is there an equivalent segment in biomedical research, and is there a source of funding that will sustain what you might call basic research?
You know, that is a question that many of us have asked. With our last NIH director, there was a focus on giving more funding, more government funding, to large translational grants, meaning very, very large groups working together to try to translate basic science discoveries. And there was less of an emphasis on the investigator-initiated R01 type of grant. We're hoping that that changes and the portfolio will be rebalanced, if you will, with a new investigator, and so that you'll have that basic science discovery engine still being funded, as well as the translational side. So I know you experience similar pains in your industry. Yep. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
One last question. When you look at the genomic database as it will be developed and its application to the general practitioner, it really stimulates the question of the training of our future physicians to handle the interpretation and the accumulation and the interpretation of the genomic information, so that, as you point out, a patient walking in the office with their genome chart doesn't know more than the physician.
That's right.
So it's a tricky question, but how do you see the great universities these days, medical universities, handling this issue with respect to the training of students?
So, great question, Alan. I would say medical school curriculum have now been adjusted to have genetics courses with data management and analysis in them. So that takes care of today's medical student and the person who would receive their MD degree in the next 4 years. What do we do about our physicians who are currently out there treating all of us? They will benefit from continuing medical education, and there's a great focus on CME in this particular area. And of course, they read the medical journals. They probably watch the Discovery Channel. I mean, they will get their information. But I think it's up to all of us just to drive the system to excellence. So thank you for that last great question.
Now